It's Eve 2020, May 14th. I am Merrill. I'm here with Fonsway, Ashterothi, Caleb, and a few others. We're going to go through some of the changes that are coming. Normally we don't go into spoiler territory, but there is so much information coming through, and so much of it is mysterious. So we've invited people we know that know it very well, and we're going to talk about what we see in Skunkworks. Sorry, it's not Skunkworks. It's, what's it called?
Hobo Leaks.
Yeah, that one. Hobo Leaks. Skunkworks is something else.
Close enough.
They're both odd words or phrases. But first, let's actually take a look at the numbers. There we go. All right, so this is fascinating to me, but it has to do with the, I would say people staying at home, right? Like the quarantining and the isolation. But
yeah, that's still the benefit.
Yeah, we're hitting like 38,000 pretty easily here on weekdays, which is crazy. That's great, considering weekends are like 40.
We were up there already until the DDoS started, right? So it's pretty much just still trending upwards, ticking up little by little.
The weekends were up there, but the weekdays were down in the low 30s, mid 30s. So getting into the high 30s is, I think that's different. Not like we're higher. So something's going on, which is good. All right. Just real quick, let's have a look at any anomalies in the statistics. I don't see anything. We're going to go ahead and skip the stats today. Siberian Squad. Whoa, that is interesting. We'll go into this later, but it looks like they took over Tenerifis. And I bet that was, yeah. So Fire Coalition gave Siberian Squad a region. I doubt that was fought over. And that'll be it. We'll cover the SOV changes and corporate moves tomorrow on Friday. For now, I want to just take a quick look at kill boards. It doesn't look like there's anything. Whoa, Pandemic Horde destroyed Pandemic Horde in Pureblind. Wonder if there's a story behind that one. You have a jump freighter, a Charon. By the way, somebody corrected me. It's not Charon, it's Charon.
Oh, I'm so glad that someone corrected you that it wasn't me.
Why didn't you correct me? You let me embarrass myself over and over again. Fonsway, what do you know? What?
I mean, it was a whole room full of people pronouncing it wrong. So not only would it have been weird if I stepped in, but I got to laugh at like a whole room full of people doing it wrong.
Tell us about Charon. Who is that in history or myth? Anyone know?
Well,
first,
ferryman.
It's the name of Pluto's moon as well. I mean, I don't know if it could be called that anymore, but you know.
Well, I was thinking of myth, not the scientific Charon,
No.
but yeah.
Charon is a ferryman of what, Greek myth?
Yeah.
He's the one that you pay the coins to get across the river Styx.
Have you ever heard that song, Don't Pay the Ferryman? Great song. All right, so that's Charon.
I've just played a lot of Castlevania.
Okay, Forsaken Empire comes out in 9 hours. There, iHubs in Veil of the Silent, so might see some explosions there. All right, let's go to... Oh, last thing is Twitter.
I imagine, if anything, Twitter's mostly just people freaking out about what we've been talking about for 24 hours now.
Yeah, it's also having a problem loading, which is weird. Well, enough of that. It's not going to... I don't think we'll find anything that interesting there.
I will...
I was pretty happy and hyped about the fact that the CCP launched an actual schedule for CCP TV.
That's exactly what I was going to bring up. The big thing yesterday was CCTV's demonstration, their art panel, and other such of that sort. And they also set dates. So now we know that they're going to be announcing stuff about Echoes on the 17th. Tomorrow is the Glente Federation presidency, so there might be something happening then. And then they have another presentation on the 20th. So I'm really excited. They're doing some pretty cool FanFest panel-y level stuff going on their streams now.
Yeah, they were doing art presentation. It's called Visuals in Eve. It was yesterday. It's about 20 hours ago. And first of all, they use the technology that we want to use. So it was really cool to see them work collaboratively and to each present to each other. And I thought that was pretty cool. And the audience was kind of, well, they were presenting to the audience, but they all took turns, which was cool. But they showed some stuff, right? I mean, this is probably stuff they were going to show at FanFest through an art presentation.
Yeah, there was a lot of work in progress. There's a lot of theoretical, there was a Ragnarok model, which is pretty cool, but I don't want to bury the lead. The big thing that I got out of that whole thing was that the mysterious structure from the Eclipse trailer is Jita 4.4.
No.
Indeed. Also, you can't tease the audience the Ulay station upgrade. Oh
They
my
didn't
God,
say that was for sure. There was
good.
the Ulay station. A lot of the station and future stuff that they were showing looks really good. But they said that they would like to do Ulay again, and they showed some ideas. But they did confirm straight up that
It was
that
probably
structure is
a
cool.
hint, right, Ash? At some point, they talked about the fact that they wanted to combine all the starter systems into one, and I suspect that might actually be what they are considering with Ulay.
Yep, that is something that several of CCP's folks were talking about, especially back in Vegas. And I haven't heard it. There's been a lot of they've shuffled in that direction. If you want to think about what we can see, but the idea would be that all of the new players would start in Ulay and go through a structured new player experience training program, and then once that is over, they would select which faction, or as part of that process, they would decide which faction they wanted to be allegiant to.
Well, anyway, go ahead.
I would like them to consider bringing the highways back if they bring Ulay into that role.
All right, so yesterday there was this Visuals in Eve, and they let out some information that was important, that was beyond just artwork. They were talking about what Jita would look like, because we know it's under construction, but it's going to be a beautiful space city.
They're also turning it around.
They are?
Yes, so if we've already been kind of curious about this just because of the way that the structure's been building out, but CCP all but confirmed that it will be pointing towards the perimeter gate when it's done, but there might be multiple exits when you undock. This is huge.
Oh, God.
Everybody will have to redo all their bookmarks. This is already pretty much true, but also this has profound implications for gankers.
Well, explain that. Why is it profound for gankers?
So right now, a freighter undocks and then warps to the perimeter gate, has to turn around and align out. So if that person doesn't, or even every ship has to do this. So everybody who doesn't use an insta warp bookmark is vulnerable to being attacked. But if they turn perimeter such that, or if they turn Jita in such a way the undock points to perimeter, then everybody who hits warp to perimeter just warps. They already they don't even need an instadock bookmarks anymore. Perimeter is their instadock bookmark.
Exactly as if it was actually launched by a player.
Yeah, exactly. So players do this. players will position their structures such that the velocity that you have when you undock and the vector that you have when you undock is already aligned with a thing that you want to warp to. So your align time is 0. You just go.
That'll get you kicked off faster. Does this also have implications for structures in perimeter, like trading center?
Oh yeah.
I mean, it may. It'll be tough to because there are still other choke points and stuff like that. Like you could just get them one jump away, but I mean, it does feel like it would make it easier to move things from one to the other. Perimeter Tranquility Trade Hub already has tethering, and that actually ends up being a big feature for people. I know I've purchased something in Perimeter Tranquility Trade Hub. I'm probably being bad now, but whatever. I bought something at Tranquility Trade Hub simply because I knew that I'd be tethered, which would mean that nobody would be able to lock me while I'm getting off the gate until I'm ready to kind of mingle back in with the rest of the flow of traffic, as it were. So this allows Jita to kind of function in a similar way. So it does cut a little bit into that advantage of perimeter. I might go there. I might look there first a little bit less.
I'm gonna laugh if they add tether on Jita.
One thing I did notice is that the other two structures that they're putting out, both the science lab, I guess it was, and the moon mining center and refinery, both of those also had docking rings. Also, there's a casino.
It's also possible that those additional undocks, you may be able to select your undock at some point, and those might be aligned with different gates.
Who knows?
Ooh, they
also to spoil a little bit or skip ahead a little bit, in the files for the patch that's coming up is a whole bunch of suits that look super fucking dapper, and there's a casino coming to Jita, so it looks like it fits.
Oh, the dapper suits that we saw yesterday. Spod, we were looking at the suits.
I just like the fancy brown leather shoes.
Yeah, that's what I said. I said that's a lot of detail to put into something that you can't even take a picture of right now. That implies to me that CCP has something coming out, or that's coming along the lines that'll help us not feel bad about purchasing little detailed shoes. Hopefully, I don't know. I've been disappointed before, I guess.
One of the things I found weirdly interesting about the suits is they came with a tie or without a tie options. Like there's some weird level of detail going on.
I think we need a little thing in before we continue this, because it looks like Pandemic just lost the Keepstar.
Whoa, what?
Yeah, he was thinking chat. I would suspect that might actually be a video or something.
Okay, let's try to get that straight. What happened?
A Charon got killed with a Keepstar in it.
Oh,
ouch!
That was that Horde versus Horde kill.
It was a Goon Keepstar that was being scooped or something like that.
Oh,
by
okay.
a Horde character as some kind of messing around tricks.
Right. So what happens in these situations, and I've been there, is that when you unanchor something, it takes 7 days for it to turn into cargo. So it basically unanchors for 7 days to the minute. The thing is, nobody knows what that minute is except the person that unanchored it. So what you're supposed to do is unanchor it. If somebody happens to be there watching it, they'll see the structure change to a condition called unanchoring. And they can start the clock and they can say, oh, I just saw it change. So that means at exactly this time, that thing is going to unanchor and we can poach it. So what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to unanchor it and then a few hours later, unanchor it again and the clock starts again. And you do that for several days until you essentially make it impossible for someone to know when exactly that is going to be unanchored. And you can make it, a difference of a week or so just to keep people off balance. Well, it looks like Horde might have been watching that watching that structure, and when it actually became cargo, they might have been able to snag it, or somebody was, I don't know, a lot of things can happen. People can steal stuff. It's hard to pick up a Keepstar and put it in a freighter. In fact, only a freighter can carry it, and only a freighter with expanded cargo modules can pick it up. It's such a heavy object. So looks like the KQK Keepstar was kidnapped by Horde. It apparently belonged to Goon Swarm, but it was also destroyed by Horde, which is weird. Let's go to the kill boards.
Yeah, as Chat just mentioned, it was pretty much a goon trying to be smart and using a pandemic
Horde
spy.
alt. Mm-hmm.
So basically an alt to see if you could sneak it out with the uniform on. It's pretty nice. Actually.
If that was true, why is she still in Horde?
Well, don't know the circumstances, but it looked like Goon Swarm killed it. No, maybe.
So these Goon Swarm harpies are all on the kill with like no damage, but the top two, the only two that did anything worthwhile were 2 dreadnoughts, both in Pandemic Horde.
The cooldown might actually also play in, right? So even though the character is going to be kicked, it won't be in effect until like 24 hours cooldown.
All right, so here's some information we're getting from chat, and we'll play along with chat here. The reason they used a Horde character was they had no other structure near or on the grid, because we shot them all, and I imagine this person's from Horde. Our Astor House was the only thing left. Or maybe that person's from Goon Swarm. Well, in any case, the Pureblind Keepstar KQK was destroyed in a freighter. That's a big kill. I can ask some Horde leadership what happened. I might know.
I mean, it's part of a pretty nasty little scuffle from the looks of things.
Yeah, there's definitely a low grade. Well, it's getting hot, but it's a low grade skirmishes going on there between some superpowers. Don't think that'll lead to anything because nobody really wants that territory, but they have been just kind of going back and forth.
Well, they want to kill each other's Keepstars, regardless of whether or not they want the territory.
KQK Keepstar. Let's have a look at that. And Pureblind, that's...
They got potted too, so they had to have undocked as soon as they got potted. Which, I mean, I guess isn't unreasonable.
Yeah, it's like 3 jumps out of X-Tech 7, which is the heart of the conflict these days.
That's a juicy pod, too.
Yeah. Is there, let's see. When you hit related, you get to see who was involved here. It's actually a lot of people around.
That's what I'm saying. It wasn't nothing.
That's a high-grade ascendancy pod.
Well, I mean, if you're burning your spy alt in order to steal a Keepstar, you might as well use your best pod.
What was the character's name?
Lindsay Nagel.
Yeah.
So I'll go, I can't find it in that battle report, too many ships, so I'll just go to the character.
Oh, the character's now in an NPC corp? Ah, cool.
So he's out now.
Well, I think that closes the loop.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll link the pod in Twitch chat.
Just got it. Yeah, just got it. I couldn't find it in the battle reports. Too many stuff, so I just went to the character to see what that character's losses were.
It's a nice
I
pod.
did the exact same thing. If it makes you feel any better.
So that's like a 2.5 billion-isk pod with high grade ascendancies, which are the new. Those are the new.
No, those aren't new. Those are warp speed.
Oh, are they? Okay. Oh,
those are GTFO implants, and then the EM7 is a line time. That's agility, and then WS6 is more economical than the Omega slot.
So this thing was geared to like move, get them going.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The ascendancy pods were the ones that got introduced with ghost sites.
Really, that far back? Wow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that was actually the big prize for ghost sites, was that we discovered the ascendancy implants.
So these are basically freighter implants when you're moving stuff around and want to get there sooner.
Mission runners.
Oh, there's a lot of reasons
this.
to want to warp fast.
Mission runners? Okay. Take your words for it. Wow, okay, so that's a big deal.
Interceptors, there's lots of reasons to want to go warp faster.
Yeah, wow. So Horde picks off a Keepstar that's inside of a freighter that was being taken down.
It's kind of cool. It's just after, we were a few people in here when Willie was talking about the shakes moving Keepstars, right? It's kind of ironic that this happens now.
Oh, not to interrupt you, but speaking of that, the drama involved in taking down a Keepstar and moving it, I recorded all of the taking down of the Onenan Keepstar when we did it, because I thought this will be memorable. So I did record all the moments, and you can see how much calamity there is in trying to make that happen, because there's a lot of stress. Anybody could pick it up when it actually unanchors. And there's a lot of bugs when you're trying to pick it up. It just won't let you pick it up. So it's sitting there for minutes as you're trying to work things out.
Well, especially because when the theoretical advisory is never more than 5 billion worth in your cargo, this is like 20 to 40 times that, right? So it's like, holy smokes, you're moving a lot of value in one go.
Yeah, there's no smart way to move a Keepstar.
Well, you can't. There's only 4 ships that can do it.
I'd really like to have the spy tell that story of how much he was shitting bricks when he was doing it.
Yeah, it's stressful. Trust me.
When he then also loses it, that must have been a flip table moment. Jesus Christ.
You know what's funny? There's a parallel too. This Keepstar being taken down. Yeah, there's some stuff I can't talk about it yet, but there's some parallels here between the Onenan Keepstar and this Keepstar, and not only that they were taken down and how much drama there is and how this one got popped. We managed to smuggle out the Onenan Keepstar. The Onenan Keepstar became the Tranquility Trade Center as it was sold to ProGod and Vili. Actually, it was sold to Vili, and they put it up in Perimeter. And I wonder what was going to happen with this Keepstar.
Well, I'm wondering what that location and why they were taking it down. Because
I think I know, but I can't talk about it yet. But I think I know. And that's why there's some interesting parallels here. I think it's interesting. Well, we'll see.
Go back to the Hobo then, and then we can release it when you have been allowed.
We'll get more information. Yeah, it might be a while. There's a lot of interesting things going around TIS right now that are kind of funny. And I want to include you in all of it, but if I talk about it, it'll all fall apart, so I can't. All right, let's actually move on to the big story today, although this is a big story. And that is Hobo Leaks. And we have Fonsway, and he's going to walk us through most of this stuff. 1 second. All right, we're looking at his screen. So Fonsway and Ashterothi, can you guys set this up for us, and what are we going to be looking at, and why is this important?
They on us.
Yeah, so before we get, I unleash the Fonsui, I want to give some background about what we're about to talk about. Just recently, we had a 20% nerf to resistance modules across the board as part of the Surgical Strike update. And this was a pretty impactful blow into a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons. However, as part of that update, one of the things that kind of got brushed under the table was that we got the long-awaited shield hardener tierside at the same time. So tierside was a thing that was created back in the day by CCP Fozzie in order to make it so that all of the different ships had different uses. Ships used to have different tiers. So like the Abaddon used to be just strictly speaking better than the Armageddon. It had more points worth of stuff. And so it just was also more expensive, had more minerals because there were different tiers of ships. And when they did tier side for ships, they made it so that there's like attack ships and combat ships and, you know, the setup that we have today. And that was so successful that they started doing this for modules. Modules used to have a lot of different confusing names. And we had to look at the meta. And the idea was that in general, the higher the meta, the better it is. This isn't always true, especially the named modules, metas 1 through 4, are particularly confusing. So they started this standardized module program where you have named modules that tell you what it makes that module special. So like compact modules take less fitting, for example, or enduring modules take less capacitor. And so they started going through all of the different module blocks one by one and correcting them so that way, and you know, getting rid of any excess and making sure that any of the kind of options that they had at their disposal about what can make a module, a meta module, better than Tech 0, Tech 1, without, you know, whatever, they would build those out. Well, after a while, that kind of petered out, and they never really got to some of the most impactful modules of the game, including hardeners. So as part of the initiative this year, they've been going back and like restarting this program. And as part of, as I said, as part of Surgical Strike, we got the shield hardener side of the coin, which did see quite a bit of like small tweaks upward, or buffs, I should say, for those shield modules that helped kind of counterbalance some of the 20% nerf. That said, it struck me as odd even then that there was no armor hardener rebalance at the same time. So it seems to impact armor hardeners disproportionately over shield hardeners because of this. All that said, according to Hobo Leaks, the next patch that we are getting, the Chapter 3 patch, will include the armor tierside. So it is finally here. And so armor will be now on par with shields when it comes to at least being updated.
All right. I wanted a high-level overview, but that was a softened us up. All right, go ahead, Fonsui.
Well, yeah. So I mean, so what we have been seeing on screen is what Ash has been talking about. As you see, there's many more changes to armor here than there are to shield. All the shield stuff fits right here. We have a couple changes off the top to the Omni hardeners. These have now, firstly, been renamed now. They're no longer called adaptive. They're called multi-spectrum now. So they follow the they now follow the naming convention for all other shield hardeners, which are now also called shield hardener. So everything is going to be called, damage type shield hardener or multi-spectrum shield hardener. So this is going to hopefully make it easier to understand for a player who hasn't already seen these names just coming out of nowhere. They will be rather descriptive of what they do. In terms of what has been done to them, it's actually very interesting what has been done to the adaptive ones, and this change kind of targets abyss runners directly. It's very interesting. So if we look over here, this top block over here, these are the choices until now for resist modules. So with this grade 0 choice, we get 26% resist, and that's for a Tech 2 adaptive invulnerability field, which is now called multi-spectrum shield hardener. 26% is for the Tech 2 omni resist hardener. That was like the standard choice. As soon as you go above that, you're spending 200, 300, 400 million ISK. That's the first jump up. So the only choices we had above Tech 2 were this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy. There were 4 steps within faction and dead space. There were 30%, 32.5%, 35%, and 37.5%. The 37.5% was the Pitham A type, the billion-esque one. So we had 4 choices, and above that there was officer, and that was it. So after these changes, these 2 modules right here, the 2 top grade Angel Pirate Omni modules are being changed. They're being buffed from 32.5 to 33.7 and from 35 to 36.3. And now our choices above Tech 2 look like this. Now we have 6 different choices. The top is still the top of where it was before. The bottom is still the bottom of where it was before. But in between, we have significantly more choices. So this is going to spread out the value of these modules. So now all the Garista's Omni Hardeners and the Angel Omni Hardeners are going to be very good for situations where people want a blingy Omni Hardener, which right now kind of points at Abyss for the most part. So that's what's interesting about this little top bit here.
May I chime in again?
Sure, go ahead.
So one of the reasons why this is so, or this could be meaningful, or answer me if I'm correct. Right now, one of the quirky things about the game is that there are quite a few places in which there are multiple modules that are effectively identical to one another. And what?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of that, yes.
Yeah. So basically what that means is that you have these different modules that do the exact same thing, but they drop in different ways or from different places. And so while the demand is technically even, the supply is uneven, and therefore the value is different. And so if you pay attention to the market, you can find which one is the cheapest one of these identical modules at any given time, or you can overspend. And while that's interesting, I find it far more interesting if there is multiple choices to choose from. Is that pretty much what's happening?
To some degree, yes. These were modules that were not quite identical, but weren't different enough to make them different. And they lined up too neatly. So there were 2 lines, and not all their stats lined up, but they lined up. And the resist stats specifically lined up directly, shifted over by 1. So the A type, B type, C type, that would correspond to the B type C. Just shifted by 1 down. It was too neat, and that's why it created the situation where there were only 4 choices above Tech 2. That was it. There were 4 choices, and now there's 6. So they shifted them further, so they are more unique than they were before, and it was reflected in the prices. The A type and the B type lined up too neatly, and the B type and the C type lined up too neatly. So you were doing exactly what it was that you just described, where you were finding the cheapest one. It was just not quite as simple as they're all the same. It was you had to know which ones were the same, and then you'd buy the cheaper of those 2. What you're describing is armor. Armor is actually, in fact, identical. But in any case, that's what's interesting about the Omni Hardener change specifically. Outside of that, the shield change is very simple. It is covered by this here, this block right here. So the top bit here, you'll see, is all these Jistum modules. These are the Angel Pirate drops. And this bottom block here is all Garista's Pith items. So the Pith items traditionally have been higher than the Angel at the same level, but require more CPU or something of the sort. So these are all being nerfed. They're all losing a small amount of their resist. All the Garistas from B type, A type, and X type, not the C types. That's actually important to note. So from B type and up, they're all being nerfed slightly. The active shield hardeners for specific artists, not the Omni, and the Angel ones are all being buffed. So what they're doing is they're bringing these a little bit closer together. That is the sum total of the shield changes. That's it. Very simple. The armor changes are much more extensive. as we see, this is the full armor tier side across the board. So what we end up with is some are being buffed, some are being nerfed. But firstly, these guys here, these are being unpublished. And this is what Ash was talking about earlier, how there are certain specific keywords that are being assigned to meta modules. These meta modules are they correspond. So I think enduring, compact, scope, restrained, and ample. I think there might be one other that I'm missing. But these are the meta keywords that we are using now that mean specific things. Enduring means it's easier on the cap. Compact means it's easiest on the fitting. Scope means it has enhanced range. Restrain means that if it has some sort of penalty, then that penalty is reduced. And ample is anything that has a capacity will have a higher capacity.
Can I stop for a second? I just
Sure.
want to point out for people coming back to the game, CCP changed the names to correspond with actual statistics to the object. So instead of having some sci-fi name that didn't have anything to do with the statistics, they went ahead and started naming things differently. So if you, as you just heard, find something with a name, a specific name, it has a specific use case or bonuses in certain areas. Go ahead.
So that is what they're moving to. Those are the keywords that Ash was talking about earlier.
And have been moving to for quite some time.
Yes.
I should point out.
Yeah, this is moving towards the completion of that. Many module categories are using those keywords properly already. So they are unpublishing. So you see all these lines I have highlighted are going publish true to false, publish true to false, publish true to false, etc. Limited, upgraded. All of these keyword items, these will no longer exist.
I think actually upgraded is a keyword, but it's either that or prototype, means just better, like without a specific way of being better. But that being said, I just want to also just wrap up the conversation about the tierside thing by saying that the other thing they do when they tierside is they set all of the meta modules to meta 1. So if you ever have any question about whether or not a module has been tiersided or not, you can look at its compare tool to see that all of the meta modules are 1 and are meta level 1, which means it has been tiersided. In this case, you can see all of their meta gets set to 1. I hope you can see that.
Yeah, that is if you look in the Hobo Leaks. I actually linked the Hobo Leaks page specifically that we're looking at in chat. So yeah, they'll be able to follow along. So let's just pick apart the armor changes really quick because we can categorize it. We can see here that all of these all the officer mods are buffed. Just like with Shield, all the officer mods received a small buff. But we don't, like, for normal people that don't have that kind of ISK on hand, we're not even going to look at that for the moment. It is important and it does exist. We have experimental and prototype. These guys here, these all got, it's going to use more cap, but it's going to give more resist. So these are all being balanced in some form or another, experimental and prototype. So these are meta modules that will be inexpensive that will and won't require the same skills as Tech 2. These are all being balanced now to fit in. So this is going to make a little bit more sense for new players. All of these other ones here, all of these named ones, the Republic Fleet and Domination Faction ones, are receiving a buff. Their activation time is going up, which means they'll run for longer, but the capacitor usage is not being changed. They'll use the same capacitor and get more runtime. That also means that if they're overheated, they will generate heat less frequently, and their resistance bonus in total is being buffed. So these will generate less heat, use less capacitor, and give more resists. The Domination and the Republic Fleet. And that is it for your buffs, people. Everything else is nerfs across the board. All this here. All of these A-type, B-types, and X-types, all getting nerfs. They're all identical to each other.
Can you zoom in a little bit on that? Just
yeah.
Just a little bit.
So all your B types, all your A types, all your X types, all your B types, all your A types, all your X types, all nerfed. Very, very small. Very, very small nerfs. 51.2 to 53, 49.4 to 48.8, 47.6 to 47.3. Like very, very, very light touch. But they're all nerfs.
I'm smiling because I don't want to cry. I'm thinking
they're
for
all
people
nerfs. Sorry, kids.
Ash, what's going on here? What are they doing? Did you already explain why they would nerf this many?
Yeah, CCP hates armor. You didn't know that?
No, okay, all right. That's simple. They're gonna bring shield up.
I don't know. I'm not happy about this at all.
I mean, this is just how it is. But it's hey, it's okay. Our metal levels are going up.
If you've got the nerf pad out, right, you might as well continue, right? This is just Rise going overboard.
I don't know, man. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, like, oh man, we'll adapt to it, but it's not fun.
Haven't you noticed the trend that CCP is trying to make it really, really hard to sit there and crunch all the numbers and game everything?
I mean, this makes it easier to crunch it doesn't make it easier to crunch the numbers, but it does make you shake your head more afterwards.
Yeah, so it ain't, I mean, it ain't that bad. It's honestly, look, this thing got a 0.3% nerf. 0.3%. This guy got like what? 0.6%?
I think that only really matters in
like
super capital ships and stuff.
We're gonna get over it. We're gonna get
I'm glad to hear the comments from the fittings directors.
I got 0.9%.
Yeah. The thing people should know is theory crafting is a real art. You're trying to get every ounce of performance out of your restrictions. And so 1 or 2% for a module it starts to add up if you multiply it by different modules doing certain things. So I don't know if these changes are enough to start to affect the viability of ship doctrines that are out there or ship fits, but
you still need to run all the numbers, right?
Yeah.
That's the point. When they do these very, very broad changes, I'm a little bit of a fan because it really just adds strain to people that need to sit there and figure out, okay, how did this change my gameplay? And how did this change small gangs versus solo and NPE versus PvP? There's just so much that needs to be done when they do stuff like this. Even if it's small changes that you might say, okay, I don't care. But it will always matter, even though they're small changes, right?
Yeah, the viability thing is important. And here's one other thing, Ash, before you go, and that is that on paper, fits feel a certain way. Like theoretically, this could be a good fit. It turns out it's a terrible fit. It just doesn't perform well for some reason. And so there's all that kind of off-paper testing that you need to do with some of these things. And so when they change slightly, you need to go out and test them and see if they perform as well as they did for obscure reasons. Go ahead.
Especially when it's really tight fits, right? That's when these changes start being interesting, because can you just maybe fit something a little bit better, or did your fit actually break because of this, right?
Ash?
So I'm going to try to pick myself off the dirt, and dust myself off and take another look at this idea. But there's two things. There's something to think about when it comes to analyzing these things, as well as the on paper versus flying it situation. One is we also have, extenders and plates. I don't remember how those, like that process went as far as like winners or losers goes. But it could be that they're shifting around the balance of how tanking works in relationship to each other. And shields and armor have always functioned differently. Like I'm thinking back, and this is what's confusing me, is that like you would think with armor having a late rep, like the rep works at the end of the cycle instead of at the beginning of the cycle. Like traditionally, I would have expected the resistances of armor to be better, which may be why this needed to be brought down. CSP considered them as leaning too hard on their resistances previously. But my point is that just comparing them apples to apples, like, oh well, this got buffed, as far as like, and what I mean is like between shields and armor is a bit difficult because they've never been quote unquote balanced. They do two totally different things, or at least do the same thing two totally different ways.
Mhm.
So the value of resistance buffs and nerfs on armor may be different than on shields.
All right.
That's all I
that
got.
that,
what-
co-
Or
that
positivity.
covers
What's
that
next?
covers the I think that covers all of the resist module changes that we've seen. Like that we took that apart pretty good. And now now we have this. And what the hell is this? These are faction losses on rats that we already have.
So this is an easy one. When you open up the agency in Sissy now, and you go to the Triglavian invasion, and then hover over there's now, instead of just, if you go on Tranquility and you go to the invasion section, it will list out all of the invasions and tell you what status they're in, and then you can click on it and see where all the systems and blah 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 blah. Now it shows you 5 different categories based on the 5 different states of invasion, and then presumably you click on that and it allows you to look for invasions in that way or of that kind. But at the bottom of each one of those is a question mark, and in the question mark it specifically says that your standings to Edencom and the Triglavian Collective will determine which rats engage with you and how, or which NPCs will engage with you and how while you are in invaded systems. So what seems to be being suggested is you can work with the Triglavian, in which case the Triglavian will stop attacking you. Or you can work with Edencom, in which case the Edencom guards will not attack you. But we'll have to see how that plays out, but that is literally what the language says. And this standings changes is what makes the difference. There you go. Thank you.
And in conjunction with the other information about system security changes, this is just getting so weird and dynamic.
Oh,
Spoilers.
we'll get there. We'll get there.
I have not been this hyped about Eve for a long time.
So I figured that, so what we're looking at right now, by the way, folks, what we're looking at is, just so there's no mystery in it, I'll just collapse everything. We're looking at Hobo Leaks. We'll start at the top. Homepage, hoboleaks.space. This is what comes up as soon as you get there. What I'm looking at today, what you're seeing on screen, is if you go to the drop-down menu to look at specifically, per update, what has been done on Singularity or what has been done on Tranquility, then you can look at this. So we are looking at the most recent update to Singularity, which happened 1 day ago. And we're just going down the list. So what we have been looking at so far is this section called attributes per type. Attributes per type. Sorry.
Stop. You did great there. Let's actually just take it a step further. These are changes on the server. CCP does not necessarily want people to look at this stuff, but what clever people have done is compared the server before with the server after. That is the test server. So they can see what's changing on the test server, and they publish those changes, and that's what this is. And this came out 24 hours ago around this time.
Actually, I want to drill into that one step further.
Yeah, what this is being pulled from is our data files that we get.
Right. So every single time either any of the clients get updated, files get pushed out. That's what updating is. And it's not like CCP can keep all of this stuff on the local client and push, or on their server and push out. They're not pushing out the stats to every single thing every single second. Most of that stuff is already saved in files on your computer. So when they change that, those files change, and we have the capacity. And the guy who made Hobo Leaks has a program now that basically every single time it gets updated, it just opens up those files, goes through the data, diffs the two of them, and then posts it in this format on the website. And while I know data mining is a controversial thing in many different games, I will have to extensively to make sure that they understand what is and isn't shown to us on Hobo Leaks, and worked with them to make sure that we don't get too much out of Hobo Leaks without them wanting it to be there. While at the same time also they have displayed a certain coyness and playful attitude about it that lets them know that they at least know that we're doing it.
Well, they've had training for 15 years, because this whole data mining thing started way back in the early days of EVE. We've been doing this pretty much since the beginning, so this is nothing new.
True. But when they start putting Hobo Leaks in the files, it's kind of on the nose.
Exactly. It just adds to the fun, because then it's even more entertaining to sit there and dig into this and then see, oh, now they're holding their cards very close to themselves, and it's like, okay, this must be very exciting.
Yeah, they've called things palm trees. They've used the word snark repeatedly. The Hobo Leaks was there to hide our Christmas presents.
Yeah, so the other thing that to mention about that, the last caveat and warning out of this entire conversation, is that because of that, and this goes beyond the normal level of like, this is only on Singularity, guys, we don't know if we're going to get it, like, they literally play with us on it. So, you know, the entire armor tierside, that's what I'm going with. This is CCP Rise just trolling with me. It's okay. On the last minute, they'll put out the like plus 10% buff. It's okay. It's okay, guys. No,
it's the same as with general stats, right? They never necessarily deliver exactly what is in Hobo Leaks if it's something very new and novel. Of course, if it's something like tiersides, we always get the right numbers. But when it's new stuff, it's usually that if you start betting on these numbers, you might actually lose out, because they can change them at the last moment, right, when it actually launches. So whether that's build cost or refining or anything like that, don't take those numbers for granted, because they're not necessarily going to be what launches on TQ.
So what this website does is takes these two sections here at the bottom that are highlighted, new files and change files. Every single time there is an update which comes to our launcher, you know, if you have your game client running, get that little error says couldn't update files because the client is running, restart your launcher, you'll see a little bar fill up. You just got an update. So that update that just came down to your computer, that's what this is. And that's what they got. And that's what they're analyzing and parsing out. And that's what all of this other stuff, that is what all of this other stuff comes from. It is parsed out of these new files and changed files. So this doesn't tell the whole story. This tells what they're able to parse out. Sometimes, if you're a little bit more dedicated, like Ash, then you will look through the files themselves and you will find things that are not included here. But today we're only, I am going to look at what's in here, and maybe Ash can add something that is not in here. What we have been looking at so far specifically is this section here with 337 entries, the attributes per type. These are the changes to the modules that we've been talking about, because these are attributes as assigned to a specific type. This is an item type. These are its attributes. These are what they changed from. This is what it's changing to. And that's what we've been looking at. And that's what we started talking about when we went to the faction here, entity faction loss. So all of these invading precursor entities, all of these rats are invading precursors. These are invasion rats. These are the ones that we see in space from the Rasnaborg on up. If you see them in non-abyssal space, then they are invading precursor entities of some sort or another. They had no faction loss, and now they have faction loss. And we've defined the factions that are going to be involved here. So these are changes in attributes. And that's kind of the lead into the chapter 3 changes. So like Ash, if you want to pick a specific direction to go into chapter 3 from here, we've now broached that particular subject.
I'd just like to ask Ash something that ties into this, because this is a bit like going back to the old seesaw thing about standing with factions and with corporations and all that. And I think if this is a success, I hope personally that they will bring more of that back on the rest of the game, right?
Yeah, and this does seem like where we're going. So before we get like so into the weeds and the lore and what we think is going to happen, let's let's talk a little bit about what we know CCP has been and is up to. Okay. First of all, we have the Drifter AI project. This started back in 2014, 2015, when CCP became dissatisfied once and for all with their old rat AI. Okay. So the old rat AI was fine. They've done some improvements over the years. You know, they've made it so that it's willing to switch targets occasionally. It's willing to go after drones. Whatever. The sleeper AI was slightly more aggressive version of it. The Sanche AI from Incursions was an Africanized version of the sleeper AI. But really, all of these things were very old school concepts of how AI works. With like threats and threat mechanics and all that kind of stuff. And so what they really wanted was a decision tree based AI, where the AI basically evaluates the conditions and makes decisions based on priorities, and what it evaluates about the world around it, like a branching decision tree, kind of like how people think. And that's what the entire Drifter AI project has been about from the beginning. So we have, Circadian Seekers, which later become Autothysian Lancers. These guys give way to the actual Drifter battleships. And then we start seeing the secondary features spin out of this. We see diamond mining rats who you can build standings with, and who will defend and rep you if you've got good standings and attack you if you don't. We see the fobs and sodios, which have dynamic reactions based on the amount of ships that get brought in, that can try different tricks to stop the players and give players a better sense of fighting an actual fleet of rats, or of NPCs, rather than simply a bunch of spawned rats that are all kind of functioning independently and in a dumb way. And so this, culminates, and eventually they've had their setbacks. The Drifter incursions fell apart because when they tried to make the rats actually like engage each other, the logic and calculations became such that when it was live on Tranquility, it brought the server to its knees and caused tie-dye with basically no players doing anything. So they had a several-year setback, but then we bring us to the Trig. And in Abyss, when you fight in the Abyss, because it is their own system, like you literally get transported to another system, and that system has a prearranged set of different places, it knows how many Abyss can be spawned in it at a time, so it can ensure that their server load is handled. Because of this, the AI can be much smarter and spend much more time calculating what to do, and each rat can have its own process that's deciding what it should do, so they can behave independently of each other. Awesome. So then the question comes, what?
I was just going to ask you if you remember when Larrikin started talking about the fact that he was using player fits on the rats. What part of that AI process was that? When was that? Because I seem to think that it's quite a long time ago.
That was transitioning to diamond rats. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was during the diamond rat phase. They were making all of the diamond rats via. That's why the diamond rats are stronger than normal rats, but not like omnipotent like Sancha rats. Like they are more like players, and so to fit them, CCP Rise and CCP Larrikin would literally make the fits in Pyfa and put in a feature request to Pyfa to make it so that they could export their fits from Pyfa in a format that their servers, or that the servers actually could deal with, their code could actually deal with. And so that way they could just design their ships in Pyfa and then export it and import it into their version of the Eve client.
I just still want them to also add it to the loot tables, right? Because that would just be the next natural step. It would be so cool if you actually shot the rat and it dropped exactly what it had been fitting.
There is some very, very limited version of that in game right now. Like you kind of get the stuff from rats that you would expect to get from those kind of rats, but it's not like their precise fitting.
Right. And to be clear, the rat fitting, like I said, they fit it in Pyfa, and that
Yeah,
generates a series of stats, and they can
Yeah,
export those stats to use in the
yeah.
game.
Then it's a whole entity that just has those inherent stats. It's not like a ship with fittings on it that makes it that way with skills and all that stuff. It's just this is the thing from the
Right.
raw stats.
So this brings us to about a year ago, all right, with invasions. The question is, how do we take what we've learned from the Abyss and bring it to our AI in the real world and hopefully do it even better? And so we see a lot of interesting like experiments with how they're going to, or like the way that the rat brains work, although they're not so much dissimilar from like Sancha incursion rats as to be uncompatible. Like you can fly against them pretty well, but the difference is that these rats behave when you hit them with electronic warfare and other systems like players would. Unlike previous rats, you can now rep these guys. If you jam them, they will stop attacking you. If you newt them out, they can't make the rats stop shooting, but they can make them turn off all of their extra stuff. So remote reps, local reps, E-war, points, whatever that is on the rat, all of that shuts off when you newt them out. If you track and disrupt them, they will come in closer in order to try to hit you. If you damp them, they will have to come in closer. Actually, no, tracking disruption, I think they just sit there and don't fix it, just like players do. But if you damp them, they will come in closer. And also, there's other behavioral changes that we see, like if they cannot engage with the player, they will warp, 150 or more, and then warp back in a maneuver that I call repositioning, in order to help fight kiters. But not all of them do, right? Some rats will, some rats won't, depending on the engagement. And then, so we have, all of the rats that warp around and the conduits and those challenges and stuff. And then you finally have like the world arc, which is like all these different teams of rats working together in different ways. And then we have the flashpoint. When Invasion Chapter 2 came out, they started coming out with all of the different empires versions of these rats. So now we have Caldari rats that act like Caldari act like Caldari Navy. They have basilisks that rep, and they have kitsunes that do E-war. It's like fighting the Caldari. Meanwhile, if you go fight the Amar, they're sitting there doing weapon disruptions and newts on you and hitting you with lasers. It feels like you're fighting each of the empires when you're fighting them, as opposed to just like, well, let me look up in my chart what this.
Do we know if any of these AI things are sensitive to actual hatred? So the actual
So
standings.
threat is the tinfoiliest of tinfoil sciences. So there are some things that, like, experientially speaking, are quite clear. So like on that list is Nestors hold a lot of aggro. Like, this is just a known thing. Nestors hold a lot of aggro. Why? Who knows? People say number of active modules. People say capacitor spend. People say, certain effects generate more hate than other types of effects. Like, who knows? But what we do know is Nestors hold a lot of threat. So there's a lot of stuff like that. Some people are willing to make more conclusive statements than that. I am not among them.
I love
It would
that.
just be kind of cool if it actually responded to the current standing of the people that are engaging them, right? And also potentially escalated based on the current standing composition of a fleet. It's just some of these things. It's always been one of the things that I dreamed that they would eventually add. So you could almost like play tank if you had someone that really, really, really had hatred from the right.
So another one of the statements that has appeared to be true by and large is that E-War does not generate a lot of threat. It takes a very special scenario for a ship that is doing nothing but E-War to actually get aggro. It can be done, and it does happen, but it is only in certain specific circumstances, like damage out threats it, and reps out threat it by far.
Additionally, it's worth noting that all these Hobo Leaks stuff is awesome. It is functionally useless for letting us detect any changes in rat behavior. They can rat behavior. What the rat brain decides to do is 100% server side, and therefore they can and seem to change that logic. And remember, it goes back to decision trees, right? So they don't have to like code every single behavior every single time. All they have to do is like decide blocks, priorities, and put them in place and weigh them and change those factors in order to change their behavior. And we have noted change behavior before. So I will say that those, while I cannot say definitively, and it seems as if standings does not cause them to hate you more and therefore target you more necessarily, those theories are alive and well.
I do like the Tinfoiliest of Tinfoiliest. That's my new favorite.
Anywho, so
what do we know about the security status thing?
So hold on. So now we got to this year where you have the event rats. The event rats all are playing more with this idea. You see not only different kinds of rats with different weapon types and different whatever, but you also see different behaviors. Whether or not they can warp off, how much they are willing to scramble, how much they go after drones. Their tactics are different depending on the empires. Which empire is leading the charge, or maybe it's just the event itself that's causing them to make the difference. But either way, it's pretty cool. The rats are some fun encounters. So
this stuff is, by the way, so you're describing what's happening up until Chapter 3 at this point.
Yeah. So now in Chapter 3, this all comes to a head, which brings us back to that string that says the Triglavian Collective and Edencom will engage you based on your standings with them. So we see a lot of different rats. We see both new Triglavian rats. We see some modifications to old Triglavian rats, specifically clarification on the Rasnaborg. And we see new retaliating entities put into the game for all 4 empires. Retaliating empire entities is the invasion rat for the 4 empires, whereas like invading precursor entity, I think it is the trig side of things. So these are all rats that are for Chapter 3, and they all seem to have 3 stages. They have a low level, a mid tier, and a high level that is name appropriate for their empire. You also see, like I said, a whole bunch of new trig stuff. The Rasnaborg, who once upon a time, or like the Rasnaborg are their reconnaissance guys. These are the guys that can be seen outside of the invasion systems. These are the guys that all of the mining guys complain about, because it ganks them in high sec. They're totally avoidable, by the way. But they're changing the text on all of the previous Rasnaborg to indicate more clearly that they appear outside of invasion zones and that they're not quite as strong as other trig. So in the Empire side, you have a bunch of scouts, like it's the lowest tier, and then on the trig side, you have these Rasnaborg, which seem to be the lowest tier. And then you have the standard trig, which, shoot, how many new standard trig are there? I think there's some, right?
Well, it is actually worth noting, by the way. So actually, this plays into a discussion that we were having yesterday. Someone asked about the doctrine that we will have to use for the new dungeons or the new versions of the existing sites that we do, the minor conduits, the major conduits, and whatever the 3rd tier site is, or whatever the site structure looks like. And the answer was that we really can't have a doctrine yet because we don't know what's going to happen in the site.
Right.
But there are certain things that we can tell about what to expect. And one of those things that we are able to do is look at these specific changes. So we see here that not only are the Rasnaborg being relabeled to be clearly what they are, they're also being nerfed very heavily, actually. Pretty much
even the originals?
across the board. Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
So the Rasnaborg are taking a great big hit. Like, some of these stats are being halved. They're being made slower. They're being made fatter. Like, they have less hit points. They do less damage. They rep
this
less.
is good because the Rasnaborg are kind of there to represent a few things. One, it's a threat for miners that don't want to pay attention, that need to keep an eye on D-scan. But also for those people who want to experiment and practice their directional scan, hunting down Rasnaborg is actually a profitable activity. So if you just want to practice D-scan and get paid for it, you can find a system with a Rasnaborg and go through the process of descanning down and first of all, realize how hard it is sometimes to accurately descan somebody down quickly. But more importantly, you can get better at it. And if you get decent enough at it, like I remember Exxon did it quite a bit back in the day. And he made not terrible amount of ISK out of it either. And the issue was not only that you had to descan them, but then once you got there, they were still, somewhere between 1 to 5 trig rats, which for like in my assault frigate or for a cruiser wasn't a big deal, but for a lot of like Tech 1 frigates and Desis, that would be too much. Even then, they popped ventures before they could warp away. They were just a little bit too strong. So bringing them down and allowing them to be an omnipresent threat that is manageable, I think is probably going to be a good thing.
So continuing down the line of looking at these attribute changes, we see all of these rats that we're familiar with. So these ships are the ones that we see in the Flashpoint sites, the Chapter 2 third tier site. And their attributes are not changing, but they are gaining this new attribute of entity faction loss. So these rats are being updated to be compatible with Chapter 3.
Right.
And we can expect all of their other attributes to remain the same. So the ones that we learned in Chapter 2 are still there.
Right. So this is the observatory flashpoints. When you go to this is what replaced the world arcs at the climax of invasions as of right now. In the observatory flashpoint, you decide whether or not you want to assist with the Triglavians or with the Empire. If you go after the Trig, you obviously go after the Stellar Observatory, which is very similar to the Stellar Accelerator. You fight a bunch of Trig, and eventually you blow up a Zernitra, and you get the components to build the Zernitra. If you fight with the Triglavians against the Empire, you fight that Empire's forces, which is what I was saying earlier about, like, you have to deal with that Empire's E-War and that Empire's tanking philosophy, and that Empire's dread, which makes different empires different. It's actually 5 different fights, which is super interesting and exciting. But the problem is that it was only Chapter 2. None of this was fully implemented. So the decision that you made in any given side didn't matter. Like, once you left, you were done. You would just trigger the next flashpoint. You could do it again. This makes it so that which sides you decide to play as becomes a permanently impactful decision, which as an organization makes me kind of scared, but as an individual makes me very excited.
So the next bit here is that those rats we've already seen, but now there's scout versions and elite versions.
Right.
So the base rats are there. So there's now a lower tier and a higher tier being added for all the empires.
But actually, not just all the empires. We see this in the Trig as well. So
exactly. So the Rasnaborg are the scouts, and they literally were scouts. And now we have these guys.
Right. So now, in the same way, they fleshed out the Rasnaborg line to have a full complement of Rasnaborg. So be afraid, be very afraid. There is anchoring Rasnaborg Drekovics out there. I don't know what I'm going to do. No, they'll probably. I'm sure it'll be fine. They won't show up on gates. Anywho, so yeah, they have a full line of lower tier Trig, as well as now lower tier all of the empires. They already had a mid tier, and now they're going to have an elite tier for the for the empires, they have all of their faction specific terminology for their elites, whereas the Trig have the Hospodar. Hospodar is a military like leadership terminology for or within the Slavic stuff, and so we've seen Hospodar before. When during the World Arc, the two special Zorias in the middle of the fight, one was named the Hospodar and the other was named the Vovode, which we just saw Vovode in the Capsuleer Clash event, the Edencom sites that are currently ongoing. So yeah, you do see these very well fleshed out 3 tiers of rats, which seem to correspond pretty nicely to the fact that there are kind of the five tiers of invasion now. The center of it appears to be kind of where things start. So everything starts with the scouts, and as it pushes more towards the Empire side, you go more to towards the right, towards fortification, and then the more towards the Triglavian side, the more you go left towards final liminality.
Yeah,
Yep.
so that's the image we have up. This is what you're going to see in the agency now. This is what's live on Singularity. If you open it up and you click the Triglavian invasions, then you are able to look for systems in each of these individual states. So the Stellar Reconnaissance is a seemingly neutral state. Redoubts and Bulwarks and Eden, are 2 individual states that are the in-between states in favor of Edencom. Finally, if the Edencom side fully wins, then it goes to Edencom Fortress, and we have first and second liminality leading to final liminality on the Triglavian side.
Right. So, okay. There's something else to point out.
We don't know. So it's possible that we're going to end up with a bunch of permanent tug-of-war systems.
Right.
We don't even know if this is going to move around.
You might want to recap what that actually means in practical terms.
Well, first of all, we don't know. Second of all, like we're using the terms that they use to us. But the thing is that okay. I want to preface this by saying that the agency as a UI element is still relatively in flux, and I know that CCP does, at least last I've talked to them, doesn't seem to have like 100%. It's not like there's some cohesive vision of what the agency is that they're moving towards. So divining secrets is somewhat hard. The fact that this is somewhat different than previous pages doesn't necessarily mean too much. But all that said, as I said, if you go to the agency right now and click on Triglavian invasions, you immediately get brought up with a list of all of the invasions, regardless of what state that they are in, and it says what state that they are in. The clear design UI for that is that all of the invasions are one thing, and then once you've clicked on that, you have all of the invasions, and each of the invasions just have a different state. In other pages, like exploration, like engage or encounters, each of the category is its own thing, right? Abyss Dead Space is not the same as Pirate Strongholds. There's nothing to do with each other. And so each of those boxes, once you've clicked on it, is their own world that explains to you the conditions of that thing. So changing it from being one list that describes to you all the systems that are currently being involved in the invasions and telling you about what they are, and changing it to a page with 5 different things to click on to go and look at that thing implies a significant increase in the complexity of how this shit works, first of all. Second of all, it does also infer a certain permanence. One of the things I find very important here is that we are kind of fudging the fact that the the second and fourth element on that list is not one state but two. On the trig side, it says it is both first and second liminality. On the Empire side,
Yep,
it says it's
redoubt
both
and
redoubts
bulwark.
and bulwarks. So currently, invasions have 3 stages. Well, 4 technically, if you count forces withdrawing, but it ramps up over time, right? So the entirety of invasions as we know it right now may in fact be escalating liminality, and that's it. Everything else is different. And so when scouts are available, that's a type of system. When the empires are building up their fortification, that's a different kind of system. It's going to have different kinds of sites and doing different kinds of things and maybe in a different state. And systems that are in final liminality or fortress, the language specifically says that the other forces cannot and will not attack it, which sends a sense of permanency to them. Now, eventually, scouts may come again, but this is what leads me to think that what we may have here, tentatively speaking, is something close to the campaign system that I talked about before, where something will trigger and an event will
And that's the key point, right? When will one of these trigger? What is the conditions that CCP has coded into the algorithm that launches one of these? And then how do they progress through in these different luminarial stages, right? Which is basically closely closing down the system gradually, right? And you can counter it at any point, right? Because then
also opening up the system gradually. It goes the other way. That's the
of
thing.
course, and that's the whole seesaw thing, which also is tied into the standing. It's just the interesting part from my point of view is the whole dynamic security in systems. The fact that it actually changes the security, and you actually have it as a modifier on top of the static security of the system, means that there's going to be so much potential in using this whole dynamic thing for other things than just Triglavian stuff, right? It's really testing boundaries of this technology, something we've begged for decades now, right? The ability to change.
Let's discuss a little bit. So
hold on.
here.
I want to directly respond to that, because that's the whole reason why I told that full story about the AI. The reason why I told that whole big long story in order to talk about this feature is because I wanted to demonstrate the fact that for the last 5 years and beyond, each piece builds on the previous piece. They experiment by building set pieces, but then that tech, once it's proven, once they've developed the big thing, then it gets pushed out, right? Once they figured out how to make the trig into an interesting enemy, then they figured out how to make the trig work in the real world. Then they brought that concept in to the empires and into events and other stuff moving forward, right? This stuff propagates outward as the base tech is being built. Better sites, better AI, better rewards, better mechanics, better different things to engage with and whatnot. Now, there is a hesitancy to go back and correct the stuff of the past and retrofit those things, and that is a very complex issue. But the good news is, though, is that now that they're building on these empire level ideas, it could potentially lead to all kinds of crazy things, like dynamic pirate empire, or territory, or whatever. But we can't say that yet.
The problem was always the fact that everything in Eve was a little bit static in nature, right? And that has been something that's been haunting us forever. Now they have finally gotten around to really start experimenting and testing these dynamic responsive systems, which can spill over to pretty much everything, because it was fundamentally what was wrong with Eve, that nothing really reacted to the whole environment and to players' behavior. We had infinite scaling. We had, which led us into the whole stagnation. We had this whole grind thing and the catch-up mechanic, and all of these problems stems from the fact that everything was static in the past. Now we can actually get to a point where everything starts being dynamic, and you can't really effectively game the system anymore if that becomes the new fact, right?
Well, I don't know about not gaming it, but as Hilmar put it, and has been kind of preaching this last year, static inputs create static outputs. There's another word that's like super like smart economics sounding that they follow up with about
What's that?
how it's like.
What's that mean?
So what that means is that if all of the ore is the same all the time, if everything is where it is, then eventually, on a long enough timeline, everything kind of settles, right? People solve it. The powerful people take the best territories, and eventually, like on a long enough timeline, the system crystallizes into a final state, which is what we saw or started to see getting dangerously close to over the last couple of years.
One second. Do you agree with that, Caleb? Is that
well, the
static
point
in,
is
static
that,
out?
that they've always been static, and it's always been the problem with static in, static out. The problem that they are looking at now, as far as I can tell, is that they're trying to do the thing that I've kind of been banging on for a while. They need to start thinking of negative feedback systems and more conditional systems. So variables that are tied together. And the trick is that if you only have 3 variables that are tied together in a combination of negative and positive feedback systems, you get an effect that can't be predicted. By definition, pendula that are linked cannot be predicted. This is like chaos 101 in math and in physics, right? So when it's sensitive to our behavior and it looks at things both locally and universally, you can't game it. You can, of course, see a trend, but you can't expect that to continue. You can't speculate on it.
So, Ash, go ahead and finish your point. I just wanted to see where Caleb was on it.
Yeah, so this goes to what CCP has been saying that they want to do for the last year, which is basically what amounts to weather, right? So they likened it to Icelandic weather. Some days it's sunny, and you can go out and make your garden, and sometimes it's rainy, and you don't have to work on your garden because it rains for you. And sometimes there's a fucking hurricane, and you have to hide.
And Thor is throwing lightning bolts at you.
Yeah, exactly. But again, if you don't like the weather, just wait a little while and it'll change. And so it's important to note that they're not making permanent, like fully permanent changes to the security status. One of the limitations that seems to exist in Eve is that the universe, as Hilmar said last year, was generated once from the static seed of 42. And that has largely defined how things have been since the very beginning. There's been small shakeups, moon mine redistribution, et cetera, but by and large, like the landscape and the what is good and what is bad and all that stuff has remained relatively static for Eve's history. But what they're doing, and especially things like security status and suns. But what they're doing is basically layering another thing on top of that. So now, like for instance, Niarja is a 0.5 system, but it's also a Type A blue star system. So it is a top target for the Trig to invade it. And so when that happens, if they hit final liminality, it would appear as if it no longer Niarja will still be a 0.5 system, like in the database, but the fact that it is being invaded will reduce its security status down from. Hold on.
All right, so I'm saying when you get to the end of this one, that's like getting into the security status thing. So I wanted to cover before we go down that road. I want to cover some other stuff. So finish that point and then halt there.
That's fine, but this is the whole point, right? People want to know the point of it before they get into like all of the math of it or the nitty gritties of it. So, any rate, Niarja will not be considered a 0.5 system under this consequence. And I'm not saying it has to be Niarja. Other systems could be here too. I'm just using it as an example to be cheeky. But when this happens, it will not be a high-sec system anymore. It will be either a low-sec or a null-sec system. And that will cause a lot of things. If you try to jump into it, it'll let you know that it's not a high-sec system anymore. It's now a low-sec system. If you have a war headquarters there, it will invalidate the wars that are related to that war headquarters because it's no longer a high-sec system, and therefore it is no longer valid to be a war headquarters because a war headquarters has to be in high-sec. Like in every functional way, it is. But then the invasion could then.
You're leaving out the dynamic aspect, right?
No, I'm not. I'm trying to explain how it works.
All right, just finish your point and just finish your point. We'll move on after that.
It's just going to, it'll still be the 0.5 system. When the invasion is over, it'll go back to being a 0.5 system. But whether it's 2 hours or 2 weeks or 3 years, as long as it is in that state, it will no longer be. So what that means is that when you spread that out to the entire cluster, then that effectively means that security status is now a dynamic system.
Oh, interesting.
And the fallout from that, okay, this was what I was trying to explain. This is easy mode for CCP. If they start tying these things together, they don't need to create that much content because it emerges. If the security status of a system has changed, if they then tie something like insurance to insurance payout to something like the security status, if they tie in the loot ferry to something like the new dynamic security system, all these things start being tied together where something has an upside and something has a downside. That means that you cannot expect any place in the universe to be flat anymore if they start doing that, because it's never going to be the same. So your payout in your system where you're crabbing, it's not going to be the same as in a dynamic system that's been changed due to conditions like what we call weather. But these things can just be added to more things, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be only Triglavian stuff that changes systems.
All right, thank you. Fonsui, pick us back up.
Yeah, I wanted to try to cover high level everything in the update, and then we can drill down another time. But regardless, weather was the segue that I was going for. We kind of blew past that. I guess I just wanted to cover this because it just covers this entire category in one shot. The weather that we're used to, this effect here, there's a special structure that gets put up during the final phase of an invasion. That weather affects the entire system. It gave us a little bit of application on our weapons. It increased our mining speed, and it penalized warp speed. So the warp speed penalty is remaining the same, and everything else is getting significantly increased. We're getting much more application out of it, much more mining speed out of it. And now, in addition, we're going to also have one for each empire, which has a relevant tank effect, armor or shield, a relevant E-war effect based on that race, and they all get a little bit of bonus to mining speed. 2 of them get 10%, 2 of them get 25%. So these are destructible effect beacon. So these things will get put up in the invaded systems, and the players will have the choice of leaving them up or destroying them, depending on whether they want these effects to happen or not. So that's one.
We don't actually know how these are going to relate to the flashpoints as they are, because this is not how flashpoints work as they are. It seems to be more related to the Stellar Accelerator point, which is a different kind of site. But at the same time, the stats about the Stellar Accelerator are totally borked in Hobo Leaks right now. So I don't think we should say anything about what will happen with the Stellar Accelerator, the Triglavian one.
What's this? Dead air? Impossible.
No. So we were talking about the security status changes, and this is an important part of what is happening. So we see that there's these 5 stages. We don't know how this is going to be applied. So the current invasion system that exists as far as Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 is that an invasion shows up in an area, progresses along a given path, and then completes. It will, it progresses whether the players engage with it or not, but the more players engage with it, the faster it progresses, and when it reaches the end, it is always forces withdrawing. And then the invasion goes away. And as far as where it gets invaded, there's a lot of systems that have been invaded more than once, even more than twice. ARC, our Attacker Research Consortium, has done quite a bit of work regarding which systems are getting hit. Ash has looked into, that documentation and a lot of other stuff as far as targeting the suns and how this relates to the story. There's been it's been narrowed down to systems that are considered to be high risk for invasions, but we don't really know what any of that means. But what this looks like here, this image that we have up, these stages, this looks like a change to the system. This looks like it's not going to, be something that simply shows up, progresses, completes, and goes away. That it looks like something is changing. It looks like a system
They
might
steal
become
the system, right? They close it if they are allowed to finish. That's
right.
pretty
So
much what we have been almost told, right? We
I
see
want
these
to.
escalations.
this
We see
looks like
the last part with the gates closing down, with the sun being surrounded by a Dyson sphere. We've pretty much been given all the hints that we need to actually make at least some conclusions on what this actually means. If you do not contest and if you do not push them back, they will eventually practically shut down the system and it goes to a null-based system.
well,
Hold on.
different
We need to take a
difference that we
giant step
see
back right
here.
now.
Yeah,
Hold on.
yes.
So first of all, that trailer is called the Eclipse trailer, okay? And as I said earlier, and the Eclipse, by the way, is this entire 3-month period, not just this patch. This patch is Chapter 3, which is one subcomponent of the Eclipse quadrant, okay? So there are things in that video that will not be part of this patch, but may come in a subsequent patch, maybe next month. It may be pushed out to something else or whatever, but we may not necessarily get all of it. Good points to note: that image of Jita and the shadow that falls over it, Jita is not going to be that built up by next patch. We know that. So there's a stage in between. So what that means is that we know that not everything's literally there. So what's happening with that gate shutting off may be another step after everything that we are getting in this patch. There is no string and there is no anything to indicate the gate has been shut off because of blah. That string doesn't exist. The only strings are cautioning you about jumping through a gate into a now dangerous territory because the security status has been lowered by the invasion. There are some clues about maybe where that might go when it comes to the final state of locking it down, but we don't have any evidence about how that will actually work. What we do know is that an invaded system will have its security status lowered, presumably so that we can fight each other to stop each other's efforts as we try to push or pull which side will win.
Now, I just want to point out that we're using Niarja system as a placeholder for multiple systems, but Niarja happens to be in between two massive trade hubs. And it's, as far as I can tell, the only road through that won't make you jump an extra 10 jumps. So it's a critical system to trade between Amar and Jita. If that system is affected in some way to disrupt traffic or freighting, it's going to be very interesting how that affects all markets.
Which is why I used it kind of coyly, because it's the one system that we know that we're pretty sure the Trig are particularly interested in.
All right, but I didn't want to derail either. Go ahead.
The difference that I was getting at here by pulling this up is that invasions are now different. Instead of progressing, starting, progressing, finishing, and going away, it's a push and pull. You start in the middle and you go one way or the other. So I don't know what this means in terms of where we're going to find them, or if they're going to move, or what, or where they're going to show up. But it looks like that may very well be on the table as far as something that will change. And this is a change to the core of the way invasions have worked until now. Because until now, it has been one way. It has been they show up, they progress, and they finish, and they go away.
Yeah, this is the opposite. This will finish only when a goal is reached, which is what it says in the end, right? Conquest, right?
But isn't this
the wording? The wording is important, and of course it's all tinfoil hat by now, right? So it's not like we know anything, but we can at least see a lot of hints of what it is they're trying. And true, I agree with Ash. that gate could also just be the thing with the election thing or whatever. I don't know. It could be many things. I'm just saying that if we take this at the current point value of what we've been shown, right?
Mm-hmm.
The thing is that this is about Triglavians coming in, taking over, actually owning space, right? And they will then become something that is potentially fought over by the existing empires. They might actually even cool down their mutual aggressions against each other and go against the Trigs, and then the players will then need to choose their side. There's so many obvious things that we kind of can expect that they're going to do. It's just how much are they going to do it, and how interesting is it going to be?
Small point here. Weren't the drifters kind of built this way to take over a system and stay there and even grow until they were removed? Like it wasn't something that expired. It had to be removed by players.
They've never... Well, the drifters in wormhole space are that way. When a drifter gets spawned by a site, it hangs around for several days if you don't deal with it.
But it expires on its own. I'm thinking of the drifter incursions that happened, but they were kind of broken, so CCP took them out.
Yeah, it's hard to say about that one. They were in theory eventually going to be pushed. Like they progressed in a similar way to in Sancha's incursions. But I do want to read, because we're saying we don't know, it's all tinfoil. I want to read the final statements about the victory conditions on both sides. If the Triglavian win, it says, the Triglavian stellar harvesting and manipulation efforts has reached their peak, and the Triglavian collective has conquered the system. Edencom considers the system lost to the Triglavian collective and will redeploy defensive efforts into systems that can still be saved. And the Empire one says, this system has been fortified by Edencom to the point that it is now an unbreakable fortress that the Triglavians will find far too hard to conquer. Ongoing Triglavian invasion efforts will move to more vulnerable targets. Now, what I mean by that when it comes to the shutting off of gates is, just because the Trig have won right now doesn't mean that they're at gate shut-off time. They might get to that later. The key is that once this system is theirs, that's when the real harvesting begins. They are literally mutating the planet, the star, in order to make it more favorable to them. They are constructing increasing amounts of structures. In the strings, it talks about how they're building an array of structures around the primary structure, and the more structures they're allowed to construct, the more powerful it will become. They are mining things and trying to extract resources in order to build more stuff, in order to build what appears to be some form of Dyson swarm around the star itself. And then, only then, will they finally be able to shut down the Stargate. So there's probably going to be a period of time in which the Trig are able to operate, in which the gate is still accessible. We don't know when these two things are going to happen in relationship to each other, or if the gate state is even going to be something that happens in the next month or so.
It's like they're fighting for their lives too.
Well, it's back to what Spot was linking, right? You basically see these parts of the Dyson sphere that they're building, and we saw the big one that was pretty much finished, right? So I'm not entirely sure of what it is that actually fuels our gates, but if the sun is completely shut off and locked in by the Dyson sphere, it would be valid to say that then the gates in the system might not actually be operational anymore, right? Because they don't have access to it. And they basically took the stellar cavity and done the same that you do with terraforming, right? They made it so that they can live in there, right? So you can expect that inside that would be the equivalent of Trig space, right?
Someone explained Dyson Square. Someone explained Dyson Square.
So Dyson,
Dyson, whatever.
So basically, the idea of a Dyson something is an array built around a sun in order to capture as much energy of the star as possible. So a Dyson sphere would be like a dome built around. A Dyson swarm would be similar to what we see in the Caroline star situation, where they put just a lattice of various different things all around the star. Either way, the idea is some sort of superstructure built around a star.
So there could be a square, Caleb.
There could be a square.
Right.
But that would be the Quadrillions, not the Triglavians.
That's the next race that's going to
the next one. When this AI breaks and they have to do it again, we'll get squares. Don't worry.
And since we're digging in lore, we should also really segue a little bit into the echoes thing, because I'm very curious about people's opinion on this new race that's being introduced.
Really, that you're gonna take us that far off subject?
Yeah, that's pretty off course. But I will say that that does remind me to mention that, as I said earlier, on the CCP TV on the 17th, isn't it on CCP TV? I'm pretty sure it is.
Mm-hmm.
They will be discussing echoes. They'll be revealing the mobile game's release date and also information about a new playable race, which is the Yin Mei, which is a ancient race in New Eden that we know very, very little about. However, CCP has all but said that the playability and the stuff out of echoes probably isn't something to read too deeply into when it comes to CCP, or as opposed to EVE Online.
Cool.
Our EVE Online.
All right, back to Fonsway.
So we've really, I mean, we could go through a few of the new items. I want to give, I guess, kind of a full picture of what we're seeing, because I don't think we're not going to be able to run through, you know, as much detail as I'd like. So let's just try to give a little bit of a picture. So invasions are changing. They have these. They're now represented in these stages instead of what we're used to until now. They may stay put. They may still move around. This is unknown. But they are push and pull instead of progress and evaporate and then move. So that at the very least is changing. We're going to see a lot of new types of NPCs. So the very common ones that we're going to see are going to be weaker. We're going to see the normal ones that we've seen before. We're also going to see stronger ones, both for for the empires and for the Triglavians. These sites are going to be involved in the push and pull war between each side. You're going to get standing with Edencom or with the Kybernaut Clade.
No, it's not with the Kybernaut Clade. The Charon.
All right, what is it called?
It literally says with the Triglavian Collective, but
okay,
in the Kybernaut Clade skin, it talks about a new new faction that isn't called the Kybernaut Clade. That's just the slang.
Broad strokes. Go ahead, Fonz.
Yeah, and
I'm just saying, if we're going to be broadly stroking, then we might as well be accurate in what we're saying.
Yes.
No king shaming.
Yikes.
Go ahead.
No, it's good. It's good. No, I prefer to be correct.
Yeah.
So just so that's kind of like we're going to see changes to the actual combat sites as opposed to before. The minor conduits, the major conduits that we've had in the past are going to be changed slightly. We've seen, indications that they're not going to necessarily spawn the same rats or same number of them, but we're not quite sure what the extent of those changes are.
I don't agree with that at all.
Okay, so that's fine. That's fine.
Well, no, I mean, like that. In fact, I would say exactly the opposite. The evidence that we've seen is that minor and major conduits will be largely unchanged.
Okay, I'll pull up the text string.
Well, the text strings are literally, they've just copied back in, like they've copied over minors and majors again. Because so now they're a component.
Did we hit another roadblock? Are we finished with the overview or broad strokes?
Well, again, this is about accuracy.
Okay, well,
minor and major conduits will have the same number of waves. They'll have the same number of the states they seal.
Yeah,
but waves themselves may be different, however.
Hold on. We're talking splinters when we're trying to build a house. I just, for framing purposes, want to make sure that we're hitting the broad strokes that people consider in.
But if we're only going to be doing if we want to get into details, we can get into details. If we wanted to get into broad strokes and get into broad strokes, but tell the freaking truth. Don't say we know it's going to change if it doesn't look like it's going to change.
A lot of this is speculation, though. That's the. Anyway, Fonsway, go ahead and continue.
I'm just keying off of this here. That's all. These notes here, they're specifically in there.
Yeah, which is exactly what we see in the current set. This is a clone of minor and major conduits.
Okay.
In this case, you see the first one, the small waves, which are the various spawners during the initial sequence, You have the medium wave, which is the every wave after that, and then you have the boss wave, which has the Zorias. Like, this is exactly what we have right now, not different.
All right. Thanks.
Do you expect to see any changes in the tier 3 site, what is currently the flashpoint? Do you expect to see that still? Okay, so why don't you talk about what you expect to see there?
So the most notable thing here, the most notable change out of all of this, is that instead of just a Concord observatory, we now have an observatory for each empire. This is, again, I don't think this is something, this may or may not be related to the observatory flashpoint. This may replace the observatory flashpoint. It may be an additional complexity and tweak of the system. But right now, there's only one Concord observatory, and that observatory doesn't actually do anything to the system. There's a second site called the Stellar Accelerator, and that does project something into the system. But whether or not an observatory has been ran doesn't actually have an effect to the weather at the moment. Now, there is a bunch of new observatories, one for each empire, that seems to project the weather effect that is supportive of that empire. Whether or not this is going to be part of a new, or like folded in or not, we'll yet to see that. But there will be some way to have these observatories be put up and have weather effects that are supportive of either armor or shield and the E-War, depending on which empire that is currently operating in that system. I do not see an observatory flashpoint. Like, we explicitly have minors and majors, all of the mechanics to make them work brought over. We do not have the observatory flashpoint mechanics also brought over in the same sort of way. It's also worth noting as we begin during this, or like as we're doing all this speculation, that the thing that we use to actually have our answers, which are the text that's used for the site itself, that tells you how many people to be expected and what Concord has to say about it, we don't have those, period, at all. So we don't have the text for the old minors and majors in here. We don't have the text for new sites at all. What we do have is the mechanics of minors and majors copied over, as well as the mechanics for new things. The new things are far more interesting, in my opinion. Like, there's a New Eden mining operation going on that involves orcas that seems very similar to Resource Wars. In fact, it says that if you're willing to come and mine for them, they'll be greatly appreciative of the relief. So there may be opportunities for you during like the Edencom side of things to go in and mine stuff. But I personally believe that stage 1 and 2 of the invasions are going to be very similar to what they are now as that escalating liminality stage. It's the expansion out of that that's going to be interesting. The other, 4 different categories. Another thing that's worth noting is that we see the old pylons from the World Arc days. We don't have a World Arc Proving Conduit fight yet. We do have a World Arc, and it can now target people, which is and theoretically attack, which is kind of spooky. But what we also have is the pylons that used to be used by the World Arc. These are AoE, status effect, and smart bombing pylons that were spawned as throughout the fight that you would have to deal with. The difference is in these case, these pylons have been renamed, and there are new rats that deploy them as opposed to them just magically appearing. And some of the rats that deploy them are titled are what the Rasnaborg. Some of them are been given to the all of the tiers have been giving them. So there are going to be rats that deploy structures that we have to kill either the rat or the structure or whatever. These are much more complex scenarios than we've seen before.
It's just
scattered
Larrikin's vision of copying what players do when they build out space, right?
Very possibly. I mean, yeah, we've known that that's one of their high-level goals.
Well, he copied our fitting stuff, and now he's copying our empire building. And then he's just trying to put that into some sort of stages of scaling. And eventually, if we don't push them back and kill the barges and the orcas and the raw crawls, well, they own the system. Bye-bye. Which was the dream, right? That was what he presented way back, that was what he wanted to build at some point.
Yeah, it's worth noting that Larrikin is largely the stats dude at this point. Although he's fantastic at it, don't get me wrong. I'm not sure if he's actually on this team.
No, but it's still tied into his original vision of what he wanted to do with this whole. Well, did you not call that procedural generation stuff back then? I think you did.
So anyway, I appreciate it, but so the point of the matter is that we have new structures that the various forces are attempting to build. They appeared. We also have things like Edencom has Sinojammers, because turning things into nullsec. There's going to be capitals involved in these things. In fact, there's capital turrets also in the files, both on the Triglavians and the Empire side. So there's going to be different kinds of activities to engage with in order to help either of these sides. It is also unclear whether or not it goes either way. It may be just a matter of being able to the trigger going after it, you either stop them or they succeed. It's not like it goes towards fortification or something. It's hard to tell. But
just a little bit back to the whole thing of arguing the whole gaming of the system, right? Because there's going to be players. CCP is basically trying to push players to engage with this on a very choice-based thing, right? Because if you wanted to say, I noticed that there was the new mining laser, right? Of course I did. But the thing is, well, you need to get to a certain stage point before those things are even an option that can drop, right? So if a player a group is pushing it back before it reaches that stage, you're not going to be able to farm that stuff, right? So you kind of have to let this seesaw and grow in some sort of natural and organic way. You can't just slam the tricks down every single time, because then you're not going to get all the content that they potentially have and the potential value in quote unquote farming them, right? So you've got all these dynamics engaged. It's basically player versus environment versus player, something that I'm pretty sure that I've heard you say quite a lot, Ash.
I think that the biggest change to Mazers and Miners conduits, if I could bring this home, is the fact that now there are going to be players that are working for the Triglavians. They are friendly to the Triglavians. The Triglavians will not attack them. What is the implications of this? What does this mean for people that come in and try to be thieves? What does this mean for people that try to be payout whores or whatever? What does this mean for all of the other player interactions that we have within these environments? That's the real change. The fact that there are going to be people that are actually being assisted by the Triglavians that are trying to stop or thwart the efforts of people who are being helped by Edencom.
Especially if at say stage 3 or 4, they become a real threat to player-owned structures, right? Then you have a totally new scenario where the players that own that is going to try to push them out. And the players that want to side with it, then you basically got a proxy war going on, right?
I mean, that is very exciting, but and it is true that you can draw the trig into firing at a structure if you do it right. I'm trying to actually maintain as little speculation as possible at the moment.
I would be surprised if they do not have an escalation stage where they will actually engage your structures and kill them.
All right. What's this thing about a Triglavian laser, mining laser?
Well, it's just I was scrolling through and I noticed that they actually added a strip mining laser, as far as I can tell.
Right. So while the empires are doing their normal mining with orcas and need your help, it would appear as if the Triglavians have auto mining lasers and have new industrial ships to move resources from one place to another. Tough to say how that's going to actually interact.
All right, cool. Did we lose Fonsway? He had to do some dog walking, I think.
Perhaps.
I want them to actually launch structures that try to steal moon materials as well. That would be glorious.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, if we are going to be speculative, then I will stress the fact that everything that has been hinted about the future, like in the last 4 months or so, has had something to do with planets. Zoria has walked on planet, and you see rocks building around her. And in the background, it talks about reshaping the world. we have on the faction warfare side of things, you have 2 different lore events basically going one on each side, both involving the going-ons on top on a planet, the planet of Intaki 5 and Floswin 4. So, and the faction warfare rebalance that we got, or faction warfare tweaks that we got, like, 2 months ago now, with loyalty to LowSec, that was part of a big review of the Emergency Militias War Power Act of YC 110, which is what made faction warfare in the first. And now they are reviewing it for further changes, specifically focusing on orbital bodies like planets. So everybody's super interested in planets right now. So my prediction is, if not this patch, but sometime very soon, we're going to see some sort of change to the way planetary interaction works, perhaps to add in dynamic resource availability based on things like invaded status.
Well, which should have been there since the beginning. They always said that there'd be diminishing returns on the planets. So if it got over-farmed, and therefore you'd have to compete
I'm saying
over planets.
Totally different resources.
Well,
so like, for instance, in an invasion, you can now mine Rakavine, which is a new kind of mineral that can be done, it refines into every mineral, or is a new type of ore that refines into every mineral besides Morphite. The entropic energies of the Triglavian collective literally warp and mutate everything it touches. And so it would stand to reason that if the Triglavians stand victory over a system, that it could potentially mutate what is available on the planets, not just their quantities.
And ideally, it's not even when they finish, right? It should maybe be, I hope it's during the process, so you still have that ability to actually push it back. But the people that want those raw materials that are specifically from terraformed planets by the Triglavians, right? Those people will start fighting each other, right?
So you want conflict drivers. This is it.
It's very much a conflict driver, massively so if it works.
Now it's, what do you want this system to be? Fight over it.
Especially because it's tied into potential resource gathering, it becomes really interesting, right? Because if those things become valuable enough, then you will see people actually deliberately siding with the Triglavians to get this stage in the systems, right? That's the whole point. Then you get this seesaw back and forth, because you also get the depletion of all the other materials that the Triglavian seems to be eating up and destroying. So that's not going to be available. So it's going to also create some sort of potential scarcity in that regard. It's just, there's so many layers to this if they roll it out right. I think my only beef with this whole thing, because I am actually a little bit hyped because the design looks fucking brilliant. Of course, they're not going to land it perfectly because they never do. But I think it's a little bit sad that this is all tied around that one Triglavian narrative, because then we kind of lose the old lore. I think then it becomes Capsuleers and the empires against Trigs. It's like, that's
demonstrably not true, because here's the thing. Again, every single time they roll this out, it gets expanded out to the other things. Like the fact that we had the Dragonar Blitz with the reintroduction of the Tempest Dragonars and what they've been up to since Tibus Heth, and getting little snippets of communication between them and the Vimoksha Chorus, which is the new Sancha sub-faction of radicals that may or may not be the reason why the Trig are being so violent right now in Edencom, because those Trig are actually a special group of Svarog-associated Trig that are actually hunting after Sancha more than they are hunting after the Drifters. Also, the Drifters are still around, and we have a new scope video coming out next week, and there's a picture of a Drifter as the only tease that we have about it. And during the egg hunt, you have the Guristas that are continuing their shenanigans and operations, and played a little prank on us because they made us go and kill pods, only to discover that we're killing DED informants that they've burned and put stuffed in there. Like all this shit. Everything that I just said is the last 4 months. And I didn't even cover all of it.
All right. Well, we'll talk more about this once we turn off here. It's been 2 hours. Is there anything else that needs to be said about this topic?
All the small stuff.
Okay, so big points to take away. Chances are this will hit somewhere around the 26th, which is the Forgotten Fortress update. With the Forgotten Fortress update, we set a 7-day time bomb to when structures that are not being fueled will lose their and become vulnerable to attack without reinforcements. Every single low-powered structure that is not fueled within that 7-day period of time will become a giant loot pinata. This is all happening in the backdrop of that as well. So there's a lot of things to prepare for. Be aware that the safety that you once had in high security may shift temporarily or for quite some time, especially if you're unwilling to fight to keep it from doing so. Your structures are about to become extremely vulnerable, and if you have anything in player structures that are not going to be maintained, you may want to check your asset safety. A lot of structures are actually renaming themselves by what name they're going to be, on what date they're going to be decommissioned. So this is your last chance to protect yourself. Changes are coming. Some are coming this month, more is coming next month, and that's just this quarter. Then there's going to be the next quarter. So
it's worth mentioning that the day after, it looks like we're going to get Hilmar talking about the Eve effect. I hope it's a longer version than the one that he did on Venture Beat, but it's definitely the same topic. So we're going to get a proper rundown of what the Eve effect is and what the whole thing with this third chapter is about.
Yep. So they said that this is only the beginning of the seismic changes, and if the Trig get their way, they will rip reality asunder, and we will start to see significantly worse and more impactful spatio-temporal impacts on the game. Space storms, destroyed dead space. These guys are about to break everything if we let them.
Nice. Good place to end there. We're going to go ahead and send you over to Tamaya Cowboy. Thanks, Ashterothi and Fonsoy before that. Caleb, thanks for hanging around. Thank you all for watching. You can always tune in here every morning, 1500. And check us out this weekend. We have a special show with Legendary FC Shadoo and Legendary FC MisterVee. And Headliner 2, still playing the game. These are all amazing FCs on a block level. That's Sunday, 3 hours early at 1300 UTC. For now, I want to say thanks very much, and we will go ahead and transfer you. And if you want to support us, Patreon/Matterall, or just give us a comment or a thumbs up anywhere you see our broadcasts, and check out YouTube channel now. Each episode has chapters, so you can zero in on the content that you want. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
So many small things we didn't get to cover.
I know there's a joke in here, but never mind that.